If nurses strike, do you think that it would be, quotes, criminal and putting lives at risk?
Well, I think, well, it could be. If there's... The NMC stipulates a code of conduct for all nurses that they must abide by. So if nurses are on strike, that code still applies. So there's various things that have been set out by the NMC that stipulate various situations like emergencies and patients being at risk where nurses must respond. And if they don't, then that could amount to negligence. And I'm not sure if that could amount to criminal negligence. I think his comments are quite...
I think he's obviously passionate, isn't he? And I think a lot of people are, because a lot of people, I get it every single day here in my inbox about people saying, I can't get a GP's appointment, or the quality of care, or it took ages for the ambulance to turn up. And I get that nurses do an incredibly difficult job. I've never saved a life. It would be terrifying if you're in a life and death situation and I rocked up. It's game over, OK? But at the same time, 2 pay rises in as many years. The reason for them striking is predominantly about pay. Are nurses paid enough?
Yeah, this is the thing. They've had the 15% rise, and then what they're asking for now, I think, is fairly unreasonable, to be honest, because they're asking for 15%, which is above inflation. And in this economic crisis, I think it's unreasonable. It means that a strike is inevitable, but the strike isn't proportionate. So I feel that to carry out strike action is unnecessary, and it could amount to a negligent type of behaviour towards patients. Because a US study actually did find that strike action caused a 19% increase in mortality.
So there you go. So, right, so, OK, so we've got some facts there. So 19%, this is a US study, a 19% increase in mortality. What I'm going to do there is just hold you there, if that's all right, for a second, because I'm just getting it in my ear now that we can actually speak to Labour's Northumbria Police and Crime Commissioner Kim McGuinness. And Kim was... Thank you very much, Kim. Great to have you on the show. Now, you were on the panel when the comments were made, the comments I referred to earlier, which were that a nurses' strike or an NHS strike would lead to, well, it would be criminal and cause deaths, OK? So what's your reaction to them? Because from what we're hearing here anyway, you know, a 19% increase in mortality, all right, that was a US study, but nurses have had a couple of pay rises in a couple of years. Everyone's a bit skint at the minute, and people don't want their elderly relatives to go into hospital and die, which presumably would happen if nurses disappear. Your views?
Well, I think the comments about it being criminal were quite sensationalist. They were designed to get a headline, which has obviously been a success. He's got a headline. But the fact is that this is about blaming people who are on the front line providing these crucial services for the fact that they're simply not being paid enough to often feed themselves or put the heating on. And a lot of this strike, you know, it's being talked about that this is purely about pay. It's not. The nurses, the NHS staff are there drawing attention to the fact that they're not able to provide adequate services because low pay and overworked and bad conditions are leading to more of them leaving the service, and the lack of funding means that they're not feeling like they can give the best type of care to their patients that they want to. So it's about so much more than just pay.
I understand that. Do you know roughly what a nurse's salary is?
Well, I know that the starting salary for a nurse is somewhere in the low 20s, which is really not an awful lot, given the current circumstances with inflation running at above 10%. And so some of these people, and we're talking about nurses, but we're also talking about hospital porters and so on, are among the lowest paid. And so when we're talking about these people going on strike, and we haven't had a ballot for strike in this country from nurses and NHS staff for over 100 years.
Well, yeah, but some would argue that the reason why they haven't had a ballot for strike in that amount of time is actually because they've had 2 pay rises in 2 years, including one as recently as July this year, of, as far as I'm seeing anyway, it's about a 4% rise. Now, no one could have predicted inflation going up to this particular cost. In fact, the very point is, if we had predicted inflation in the economic situation, we wouldn't have hurtled headlong into it. So, unfortunately, people suffer, don't they, when inflation rises? I'm sorry, it sounds insensitive, but why should nurses be any different? Their union should have negotiated better in the first place.
Well, their new unions are negotiating, and that's what this process is about. And actually, you know, they haven't been balloted for strike for over 100 years because care professionals do this with the absolute utmost of consideration. This is the last thing that they want to do. Nobody wants them to have to do this. And so, for me, the government need to get back around the table and think about this. And I don't think that it's right to make the argument that nurses are any different. There are a number of sectors who feel that they're having to take this strike action because whilst everyone suffers when inflation goes up, we are talking about some of our lowest paid workers who've gone from the front line to the bread line, who are using food banks. These are our professional people who are there.
I understand that, and I think you're alluding to things like rail workers, teachers, etc.
Yeah.
And I do understand that, but at the same time, in the private sector, people are getting pay rises in line with inflation, and it is those people in the private sector who are going to have to pay for the pay rise for people in the public sector.